These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Raycon Earbuds. Stay at home with better sound. More info at buyraycon.com/Tom. Omega XL, which according to clinical research helps joints. More info at omegaxl.com/Tom. CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code Tom. The Clean Phone Pro, phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. Keeps hair loss treatment. More info at keeps.com/Tom. And Plexiderm Wrinkle Reducer. Real science, real results. More info at plexiderm.com, code Tom.
We say fight back!
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment by yours truly. This is from Chapter 1, The Unholy Alliance of Racism, Genocide, and Guns. In Isaiah 14:21, the Lord tells Isaiah, "Prepare for his sons a place of slaughter because of the iniquity of their fathers." It's a variation on the old story of karma and seems in a very real way to be playing out today in the United States. America is facing an epidemic. Public health officials use that word of gun-related suicides, accidents, and even homicides and police killings. That epidemic has grown worse in the past decade, largely because the number of guns in America has increased, in large part because of the racial fears of white men who have bought guns in record numbers for 8 years during the time in office of America's first black president. A landmark 1999 study from researchers Franklin Zimmerman and Gordon Hawkins showed that the main correlation, far surpassing mental illness, socioeconomic status, or race, that could be defined as causal in predicting the rates of gun deaths is a simple number: the number of guns distributed among society. In the 30 years since that study, Zimmerman and Hawkins' results have been replicated and reanalyzed dozens of times. As the American Academy of Pediatrics said in a release published in AAAS's Science magazine, quote, "New research shows dramatic differences in the number of children hospitalized and killed each year in the U.S. from firearm-related injuries based on their state's gun legislation, even after adjusting for poverty, unemployment, and education rates. It found twice as many pediatric firearm deaths in states with the most lenient gun regulations compared to states where gun laws are strictest," end quote. They added that this is a critical issue for children, quoting Stephanie Cho, MD, the lead author of the abstract, quote, "Firearm-related injuries are the second leading cause of death among children in the United States. But we found a clear discrepancy in where those deaths happen that corresponds with the strengths of states' firearm legislation. In states with lenient laws, children die at alarmingly greater rates," end quote. And unsurprisingly, America not only has unusually lenient gun laws, but also has more guns in civilian hands than any other country in the world. America has a bit more than 4% of the world's population, but holds almost 50% of all the guns in civilian hands worldwide, more than 390 million guns. And the more guns a society has, the more gun deaths it will experience. The NRA and their army of lobbyists have been quite successful in making this happen. During Obama's presidency, there was a steady and hysterical drumbeat of articles, emails, and political proclamations by so-called pro-gun politicians and think tanks, suggesting that Obama was preparing to take away everyone's guns at any minute. There was even a subtext embraced by the hard right that he wasn't going to stop there. After disarming white Americans, these folks said, Obama was going to intern them in otherwise unused FEMA camps. Flipped-out gun owners were repeatedly arrested during the Obama years trying to break into retired or temporarily vacant military facilities and toxic waste sites, looking for evidence to prove that Obama was, in fact, preparing the modern-day version of the World War II-era Japanese internment camps. White supremacy was the founding notion of this nation. White Europeans thought themselves so superior to the human beings they met here in 1492 that Columbus himself became the first North American slaver, shipping Taino Indians back to Spain as slaves to the royal family. A slave is as good as gold, Columbus wrote for the king and queen. Europeans in the Americas then stepped up that game into a hemisphere-wide campaign of racial genocide, pulling off the largest multi-generational mass murder in the history of the world. In the midst of that effort, they also created the legal mechanisms necessary to define and legally regulate slavery, and even built those systems into America's founding document, the Constitution. America was birthed in slavery and genocide, and both needed guns. It was the superior weaponry of guns that gave the European settlers a massive advantage over the bow and arrow-equipped Native Americans, and it was the raw power of widespread white ownership of guns in the South that propped up the institution of slavery for hundreds of years. Without guns, neither would have been possible, or at least neither would have been as easy as they were to pull off. And now, after centuries of guns being used to kill off and keep down people of color in America, those same guns are creating a terrifying epidemic of gun-facilitated violence, from public schools to private homes and public concerts. It's enough to make one think that Isaiah was onto something. Chapter 2, The Sanitized History of America. The United States' expansion and conquest in the late 18th century through the 19th century and into the 20th century is a history written by white men, inked in the blood of Native Americans, and built on the broken and bloody backs of enslaved people brought here from Africa. From 1791, when the Bill of Rights went into effect, until the end of the Civil War, the Second Amendment protected the rights only of white men to own guns. This is simply because until the ratification of the 14th Amendment, states determined who was recognized as a person protected under the Constitution. Initially, in most states, that meant that white men who owned land and paid taxes were the only people considered full citizens under the Constitution. In the South, white men with guns formed slave patrols to control slaves and formed posses to hunt escaped slaves. The book, The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Well, happy end of July, and today is the day that the nation lays to rest John Lewis, the congressman, civil rights icon, a man who was brave enough, and I think it's so important that we really understand this, brave enough that he looked for opportunities to confront hatred and racism in a way that he knew would cause not only physical pain, but could end his life. And he always did it with nonviolence. There is such a lesson there. His funeral's going on right now. When President Obama speaks, we're dancing around technical stuff, doing the show remotely and everything. We may be able to put him on the air. We'll see. But I wanted to read to you what John Lewis wrote and asked the New York Times to publish on the day of his funeral. It's very short. It's maybe 8 or 9 paragraphs. And it's basically his letter to you and me and America. But I think particularly to you and me, particularly to those of us who care about the fate and future of this country, particularly to those of us who love the idea, are in love with the idea of a truly pluralistic country, of a country where everyone is judged by the content of their character, to paraphrase Martin Luther King, not the color of their skin. And so here, these are John Lewis's words. He said, "While my time has now come, my time here has now come to an end, I want you to know that in the last days and hours of my life, you inspired me. You filled me with hope about the next chapter of the great American story when you used your power to make a difference in our society. Millions of people, motivated simply by human compassion, laid down the burdens of division. Around the country and the world, you set aside race, class, age, language, and nationality to demand respect for human dignity. That is why I had to visit Black Lives Matter Plaza in Washington. Though I was admitted to the hospital the following day, I just had to see and feel it for myself that after many years of silent witness, the truth is still marching on." Emmett Till, John Lewis wrote, was my George Floyd. He was my Rashard Brooks, Sandra Bland, and Breonna Taylor. He was 14 when he was killed, and I was only 15 years old at the time. I will never forget the moment when it became so clear that he could easily have been me. In those days, fear constrained us like an imaginary prison, and troubling thoughts of potential brutality committed for no understandable reason were the bars. Though I was surrounded by two loving parents, plenty of brothers, sisters, and cousins, their love could not protect me from the unholy oppression waiting just outside that family circle. Unchecked, unrestrained violence and government-sanctioned terror had the power to turn a simple stroll to the store for some Skittles or an innocent morning jog down a lonesome country road into a nightmare. If we are to survive as one unified nation, we must discover what so readily takes root in our hearts that could rob Mother Emanuel Church in South Carolina of her brightest and best, shoot unwitting concert-goers in Las Vegas, and choke to death the hopes and dreams of a gifted violinist like Elijah McClain. Like so many young people today, I was searching for a way out, or some might say a way in, John Lewis wrote. And then I heard the voice of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. on an old radio. He was talking about the philosophy and discipline of nonviolence. He said, "We are all complicit when we tolerate injustice." He said, "It is not enough to say it will get better by and by." He said, "Each of us has a moral obligation to stand up, and speak out. When you see something that is not right, you must say something. You must do something. Democracy is not a state, it is an act. And each generation must do its part to help build what we called the beloved community, a nation and a world society at peace with itself." John Lewis wrote, "Ordinary people with extraordinary vision can redeem the soul of America by getting in what I call good trouble, necessary trouble. Voting and participating in the democratic process are key. The vote is the most powerful nonviolent change agent you have in a democratic society. You must use it because it is not guaranteed. You can lose it. You must also study and learn the lessons of history because humanity has been involved in this soul-wrenching existential struggle for a very long time. People on every continent have stood in your shoes through decades and centuries before you. The truth does not change, and that is why the answers worked out long ago can help you find solutions to the challenges of our time. Continue to build union between movements stretching across the globe because we must put away our willingness to profit from the exploitation of others." John Lewis wrote, "Though I may not be here with you, I urge you to answer the highest calling of your heart and stand up for what you truly believe. In my life, I have done all I can to demonstrate that the way of peace, the way of love and nonviolence is the more excellent way. Now it is your turn to let freedom ring." John Lewis finished by writing, "When historians pick up their pens to write the story of the 21st century, let them say that it was your generation who laid down the heavy burdens of hate at last, and that peace finally triumphed over violence, aggression, and war. So I say to you, walk with the wind, brothers and sisters, and let the spirit of peace and the power of everlasting love be your guide. John Lewis, his last message to us. There's a lot going on in the news. The economy just had the worst quarter in the history of the United States, worse than the Great Depression. Almost a 1/3 drop in GDP. Never happened before, ever, in the history of this country, all the way back to 1789. It has literally never happened before. But it happened on Donald Trump's watch. And so what did he do? He tweeted, hey, let's delay the election. Right. Meanwhile, I heard Jenny Durkin, the mayor of Seattle, on NPR this morning, and she was suggesting, and I agree with this, that what Trump was doing in Portland and Seattle, or is doing in Portland and Seattle, with his federal secret police. And by the way, in Portland last night, they're starting to wear uniforms or identification, at least as to the branch that they're from. Like I said, they were fine-tuning this thing. This is test, right? We're going to work this out. We're going to figure out how to make this work. And they discovered that one of the things people objected to was no insignia. So they'll put the insignia on. So what? They're still, it's like they got away with something outrageous and people objected to a piece of it. And so they'll say, well, we'll fix that piece. But Jenny Durkin was suggesting that what we're seeing is practice for November, for the elections. I've told you the story many, many times about William Rehnquist intimidating Hispanic and African-American voters back in Phoenix, Arizona in the 1960s. She thinks, and I think she's right, that there's going to be federal officers in any city that is majority Democratic, which is, I think, probably most all of our cities, in November as a way of intimidating voters. We'll see.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And finally, Herman Cain also died today. Did he commit suicide by going to Trump's Tulsa rally, or did Trump kill him? Welcome back. So, it's absolutely brilliant piece by John Lewis. I just can't emphasize that enough. And I think this is an interesting question. Did Herman Cain commit suicide? Did he say, okay, I'm going to go to this rally. I'm 74 years old. I'm going to go to a rally without a mask. I'm going to be surrounded by people not wearing masks. It was 11 days after the Tulsa rally that Herman Cain was sick. We know it all, typically happens within 2 weeks, within 14 days. Or did Donald Trump, by demanding that the rally happen, by essentially leaning on high-profile Republicans to show up and be part of it, and then by, performing it, did Donald Trump kill him? Twitter is all over this. Was it murder? Was it suicide? I think it was both, frankly. But, we can talk about that. Here in Portland, Donovan LaBella, the Portland protester who was shot in the face by Trump's stormtroopers and fractured his skull and shattered his face bones, is back in the hospital. He has a depressed skull fracture, broken facial bones. His mother says that he's in severe pain. He's got a sinus infection, which has reached the left side of his brain. All these bones up here are all busted up now. So, any little infection gets all the way into his brain. This is terrible. The medical staff put a port in his back to allow fluid to drain. He suffered from severe headaches and migraines, his mother said. He also experienced what she described as impulse control issues as a result of damage to the frontal lobe of his brain. I told you the other day, Google Phineas Gage. You'll know what this kid is going to live with for the rest of his life. And he has experienced mild cognitive problems. He was absolutely peaceful. He was standing there holding a loudspeaker over his head. That was it. And they shot him in the face. It's amazing. It's absolutely amazing. Donald Trump also, in his tweet this morning, talking about how we need to postpone the election. I mean, it's just so obvious that this is an attempt not only to change the conversation away from how bad the economy is on Trump's watch, and create fear and loathing and concern, all that sort of thing. But it also, the immediate response to it all over Twitter was, hey, wait a minute, dude, you're saying that our kids can go to school, that's all good, but we can't go vote because of the coronavirus? And I think, it may well be the case that this is how it's going to play out, that Donald Trump is, and the Republicans in his administration, increasingly, we need to be very clear that this is Donald Trump, this is Bill Barr, this is Stephen Miller, this is, pick your, administration member. This is all of these people doing this. So, pushed or jumped? Did Herman Cain die of suicide, or was he murdered? We'll be right back. The Hartmann Report is a free daily podcast, 7 days a week, and you can find our entire 3-hour podcast over at thomhartmann.com. So it turns out back in November, the spy agencies in the United States were notifying the Trump administration that something's going on in China. Looks like another SARS outbreak. Maybe we should get ready for this. It was ignored. I've got a new video up over at thomhartmann.com for the supporters of our program that basically goes through the whole timeline, all the way from, actually going back to 2018 when Trump disbanded 3 different anti-pandemic agencies in the Department of Homeland Security, the National Security Council, and the executive branch. Just closed them down, fired the people. That was the end of that. How he ignored the intelligence in November, he ignored the intelligence in December, he ignored the epidemic now coming into the United States in January, he ignored it in February, just going the blow-by-blow timeline. And I think it's really worth having it all in one place, a good recap, a good summary of this that you can refer to and you can share with your friends. It's all over at thomhartmann.com. You can check it out. So we're now to the point where every minute, on average, an American is dying of the Trump virus. Every minute, the Trump virus kills another American because Donald Trump and the Republican Party refuse to do anything about it. And now they're trying to use the Trump virus to mess with the election this November. Trump's Postmaster General is actively destroying the post office, slowing down the mail to create a crisis for people who want to vote by mail, while Republican governors are closing urban polling stations and stripping people from the voting rolls left and right. And now to distract from the worst economic news in the history of the United States, to distract from John Lewis's message and funeral, and to set up his challenge when he loses the election. And make no mistake about it, much of what Donald Trump is doing is not about November 3rd. It's about November 4th. It's about claiming that he didn't actually lose. It's about creating, some sort of plausible uncertainty. It's about throwing the system into chaos. And even if and when he is thrown out altogether and he leaves the White House on January 20th, continuing to play the role of shadow president starting on January 21st, particularly if the Trump crime family succeeds in buying or starting a television network, as he was about to do back 4 years ago, or almost 4 years ago, when he was running for president. This was part of his plan, was after he lost, and he thought he was going to lose. He did not have he had a concession speech ready. He had no victory speech ready. He knew he was going to lose. He didn't count on a little help from his friends. So anyhow, that's what I think this is about. So, very few people thought that Trump would get away with asking for foreign help to win an election, but he did. Few people thought he'd get away with saying terrible things about women and be charged with sexual assault, but he did. Few people thought he'd get away with eliminating environmental rules and poisoning our rivers, but he did. Few people thought he'd get away with giving a $3 trillion gift to himself and his billionaire buddies, but he did. And now Trump is trying to set up a situation where he wins even if he loses. By casting doubts around the election, when he loses, he'll continue to claim that he's the legitimate president of the United States. And this will almost certainly be a disaster for democracy, both here in the United States and around the world. This is like, the autocrat's playbook. All because Donald Trump wants to keep himself from going to jail, and a bunch of right-wing billionaires want him to continue shoveling tax cuts and deregulation to them. We can't let him get away with it. Do you think America's going to let Donald Trump get away with this? It's frankly mind-boggling. On top of this, we have now the GDP dropped 32.9%. That's for all practical purposes, 33%. A third of the economy just collapsed. Republicans in the Senate are now saying, last week was the last $600 check that most Americans who were 25 million Americans on unemployment got. That was $2,400 a month, in addition to regular unemployment that Americans were getting. That was a universal basic. That's about as close to a universal basic income as we have ever seen in the United States, and it kept the economy together to some extent. I mean, we had obviously 1/3 drop in GDP, but it didn't. I mean, we didn't have a radical explosion in homelessness and certainly we've had an explosion of homelessness and hunger and all these other things, but this served as a damper on that. Well, Mitch McConnell and all the Republicans in the Senate are basically saying, $600 a week? No, we're not going to do that again. Maybe, if you're lucky, in a few weeks, when we decide that, what the hell, we'll get around to it then, we will give you we'll give you, a couple of $100. Actually, what Trump is lobbying for is another $1,200 one-time check, so he can mail it out with a one-time letter over his signature saying, here's $1,200 from me. $600 a week, nobody sees anything from Trump. They don't think that Trump gave that to them. Are we going to let them get away with this? Do you think that they're going to get away with this? I don't think so. I'm increasingly thinking that this is what we're looking at right now is what we saw in this country, frankly, on a smaller scale. In 1929, 30, 31, and 32, when Herbert Hoover was president, and he said, the stock market has collapsed. We've got 30% unemployment. Yes, we've got, 15, 20% of our people homeless. And he went on to say that he wasn't going to do anything about it. We have no official policy with regard to coronavirus, with the Trump virus, from the federal government. I've got to start calling it the Trump virus. We all have to start calling it the Trump virus. We have no official policy. I mean, it's just nuts. So, what are your thoughts on this day? What are your thoughts about John Lewis? What are your thoughts about where this is going? What are your thoughts about how, whether or not they're going to get away with this, how this is going to play out? Do you agree with the mayor of Seattle and me? We'll be back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And by the way, at the top of the next hour, Professor Richard Wolff will be with us. Is this the new normal? How do we deal with this? book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment by yours truly. This is from Chapter 1, The Unholy Alliance of Racism, Genocide, and Guns. In Isaiah 14:21, the Lord tells Isaiah, "Prepare for his sons a place of slaughter because of the iniquity of their fathers." It's a variation on the old story of karma and seems in a very real way to be playing out today in the United States. America is facing an epidemic. Public health officials use that word of gun-related suicides, accidents, and even homicides and police killings. That epidemic has grown worse in the past decade, largely because the number of guns in America has increased, in large part because of the racial fears of white men who have bought guns in record numbers for 8 years during the time in office of America's first black president. A landmark 1999 study from researchers Franklin Zimmering and Gordon Hawkins showed that the main correlation, far surpassing mental illness, socioeconomic status, or race, that could be defined as causal in predicting the rates of gun deaths is a simple number: the number of guns distributed among society. In the 30 years since that study, Zimmering and Hawkins' results have been replicated and reanalyzed dozens of times. As the American Academy of Pediatrics said in a release published in AAAS's Science magazine, quote, "New research shows dramatic differences in the number of children hospitalized and killed each year in the U.S. from firearm-related injuries based on their state's gun legislation, even after adjusting for poverty, unemployment, and education rates. It found twice as many pediatric firearm deaths in states with the most lenient gun regulations compared to states where gun laws are strictest," end quote. They added that this is a critical issue for children, quoting Stephanie Cho, MD, the lead author of the abstract, quote, "Firearm-related injuries are the second leading cause of death among children in the United States. But we found a clear discrepancy in where those deaths happen that corresponds with the strengths of states' firearm legislation. In states with lenient laws, children die at alarmingly greater rates," end quote. And unsurprisingly, America not only has unusually lenient gun laws, but also has more guns in civilian hands than any other country in the world. America has a bit more than 4% of the world's population, but holds almost 50% of all the guns in civilian hands worldwide, more than 390 million guns. And the more guns a society has, the more gun deaths it will experience. The NRA and their army of lobbyists have been quite successful in making this happen. During Obama's presidency, there was a steady and hysterical drumbeat of articles, emails, and political proclamations by so-called pro-gun politicians and think tanks, suggesting that Obama was preparing to take away everyone's guns at any minute. There was even a subtext embraced by the hard right that he wasn't going to stop there. After disarming white Americans, these folks said, Obama was going to intern them in otherwise unused FEMA camps. Flipped-out gun owners were repeatedly arrested during the Obama years trying to break into retired or temporarily vacant military facilities and toxic waste sites, looking for evidence to prove that Obama was, in fact, preparing the modern-day version of the World War II-era Japanese internment camps. White supremacy was the founding notion of this nation. White Europeans thought themselves so superior to the human beings they met here in 1492 that Columbus himself became the first North American slaver, shipping Taino Indians back to Spain as slaves to the royal family. "A slave is as good as gold," Columbus wrote for the king and queen. Europeans in the Americas then stepped up that game into a hemisphere-wide campaign of racial genocide, pulling off the largest multi-generational mass murder in the history of the world. In the midst of that effort, they also created the legal mechanisms necessary to define and legally regulate slavery, and even built those systems into America's founding document, the Constitution. America was birthed in slavery and genocide, and both needed guns. It was the superior weaponry of guns that gave the European settlers a massive advantage over the bow and arrow-equipped Native Americans, and it was the raw power of widespread white ownership of guns in the South that propped up the institution of slavery for hundreds of years. Without guns, neither would have been possible, or at least neither would have been as easy as they were to pull off. And now, after centuries of guns being used to kill off and keep down people of color in America, those same guns are creating a terrifying epidemic of gun-facilitated violence, from public schools to private homes and public concerts. It's enough to make one think that Isaiah was onto something. Chapter 2, The Sanitized History of America. The United States' expansion and conquest in the late 18th century through the 19th century and into the 20th century is a history written by white men, inked in the blood of Native Americans, and built on the broken and bloody backs of enslaved people brought here from Africa. From 1791, when the Bill of Rights went into effect, until the end of the Civil War, the Second Amendment protected the rights only of white men to own guns. This is simply because until the ratification of the 14th Amendment, states determined who was recognized as a person protected under the Constitution. Initially, in most states, that meant that white men who owned land and paid taxes were the only people considered full citizens under the Constitution. In the South, white men with guns formed slave patrols to control slaves and formed posses to hunt escaped slaves. The book, The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment.
In this week's Science Revolution, concerning news that we may have hit a tipping point for methane in the Arctic. Professor Richard Wolff drops by to discuss a pandemic tax to help fund the COVID-19 recovery for the common good. Kevin Camps of Beyond Nuclear visits to connect the FBI raids of the Ohio House Speaker to the billion-dollar bailout of two very dangerous, age-degraded nuclear power plants. And in Geeky Science, there's a new study out about how sitting confuses your body's fat or fit system. Find the Science Revolution wherever fine podcasts are available. Welcome back. So Elaine Flynn tweets back at me, asking the question, was Herman Cain killed or did he commit suicide? Elaine says, Tom, it wasn't murder or suicide, seriously, to claim that these Trump followers who are looking to get what they can out of this and or raise their own status, they are not victims, they are complicit. Trump isn't doing this alone, he's backed by an army of many grabbers. Yeah, I can go along with that. Pam in Chicago. Hey, Pam, what's on your mind today?
Tom, how are you? Tom, I wanted to...
Pam?
Can you hear me?
I can, just fine.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. Tom, I wanted to comment about John Lewis because we know that he spent his life just fighting really for this country, but I'm going to say particularly for freedom and justice for Black people. And that was his life, and then the ending cycle of his life was absolutely doing the same thing. And, Tom, what I wanted I'm going to specifically say your audience, your white audience to understand is that Black people just expend an inordinate amount of energy fighting racism, justice, and discrimination. And I can only imagine that if John Lewis didn't have to dedicate his life to that cause, as well as many other civil rights leaders, what they really could have accomplished, Tom.
Oh, yeah.
And not that his legacy, isn't, just entrenched in our hearts, but it is just so unfair that this has to be a continuing struggle. And, Tom, what I simply ask you to continue to do, as well as other white people, just search your own hearts in your own communities. Tom, you tell the truth about white racism, attitudes, and those things that we might not be privy to as Black people. And I would just encourage you to continue to do so. But I would also ask every other and what we call right-thinking and good white person to absolutely do the same. Because Black people, Tom, we are tired, but yet we continue the fight because we know we have to do it for our children. We know we can't let this white nationalist racist president win. And if we are going to coexist as human beings in this country and in this world, Tom, there has to be a major change in white people's behavior, attitudes, and just their sense of fairness. Because, Tom, just speaking, Tom, there are simply things we can't get back. There are accomplishments that my great-grandparents couldn't achieve because of racism. I mean, there are potential that will never, ever be recaptured because of racism and hatred. And so I'm asking the white community to come out hard. You know, when they say come hard, come strong, come hard, I'm asking the white community to do that, Tom, against racism, against Trump. His reversal, telling the suburbanites, well, now you have your suburbs back and your property values can go up. That's blatant racism. And there were people in the audience clapping for that. So I'm asking those good suburban people, stand up against that racism. The suburban mayors all over this country, call it out for its hatred.
Thank you, Pam.
And Tom, thank you.
You're welcome. I can't add anything to what you said. It was brilliant. Thank you so much. Kevin in Durham, North Carolina. Hey, Kevin, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, so I'm really concerned about that tweet that Trump sent out about delaying the election. Right. I'm not surprised that this is something that he's floating out there to see what he can get away with. And, of course, everybody I'm seeing on Twitter is like, oh, he can't do that, But I'm like, when has the law and our institutions stopped him before? And I'm seeing on Twitter that Mike Pompeo is saying, well, at the end of the day, it'll be up to the Justice Department. So I'm really concerned about it. I don't know. Do you think that he can realistically get away with this, and how could he do it?
I wouldn't put anything past him, Kevin. I think that there is a remote possibility that he could pull this off. It would take the complicity of both Bill Barr and John Roberts, in all probability. But, I'm not putting anything past this guy. We need to take absolutely everything seriously. I do think, though, that, he has... you got to understand how Donald Trump thinks. This goes back to the 70s. This is or the 80s, really, when he came into his own in New York City and, got a couple $100 million of his daddy's money through tax fraud and then started, living big and manipulating the media, basically, getting himself in the local papers every single day. And, every day he wakes up and asks himself, how can I get on the front page of the New York Times? That's the number one. And number two, he comes up with a collection of outrageous things that he can say or do. He's probably got a list somewhere that he knows will stop dead in its tracks the news cycle. And everybody, all the reporters will go chasing after this particular, rabbit and, ignore the herd of rabbits going down the road. And to mangle a metaphor. And, postponing the elections has to be at the very top of that list of all the things that he could say that would cause everybody to go, whoa, he said what? That's got to be one of the biggest. And so on the day that, keep in mind, this is the guy who thought he was going to get reelected president on the basis of a good economy. That was basically his only card. That was the only hand that he had that he thought he could play. And it's been taken away from him. And today, it's not just taken away from him, it's shoved in his face. 1/3 of our entire gross domestic product vanished in the second quarter of this year. I mean, that's just absolutely mind-boggling. So, I think that on the one hand, I think that we need to take it very seriously, and we need to have a conversation about it. We need to be talking about constitutional scholars about it. We need to get the measure of Congress. Manu Raju from CNN has been tweeting. He's been going around asking Republicans, Lindsey Graham, Tom Cotton, all these guys. He's asking them, well, what do you think? And they're saying, like, I've got to get to the golf course, or I'm busy, or I'm not taking calls right now. I mean, nobody is talking about it, right? One Republican member of the House from Texas said, well, he was just asking the question. So we'll see. I think, though, that the Lincoln Project is starting to bite hard in the Republican Party. They issued yesterday or the day before, they put out this new ad against Susan Collins, which is getting some real play in Maine. I don't know if it's on TV or not, but it's really, stirred up the Twitter sphere and Facebook and everything else, which is probably, even more effective than running TV ads. And they came out yesterday and they said, any of you Republicans in the Senate or in the House, if you throw in with Trump, you can expect one of these ads to name you. And if you don't throw in with Trump, you can expect that we are not going to come after you. And so far, the only person that they're not coming after, or that they've said that they're, or implied, I guess, that they're not coming after is Mitt Romney, because Mitt Romney voted to impeach him. So, and Mitt Romney is speaking out right now. So there's a reckoning coming for the Republican Party. So anyhow, this whole issue, Kevin, I think exists on a whole bunch of different levels. Did you want to say something else?
I do agree that it's distraction also. I just think that the Democrats need to take everything that he says seriously. When you look at everything that's happened in the past 3.5 years and look at troops in cities. So
yeah, it's the old. I'm forgetting who said it, but one of our real iconic black writers. But anyhow, when someone tells you who they are, believe them. And Trump has certainly done that. Leslie in Ocala, Florida. Hey, Leslie, what's on your mind?
Hey, I was just wondering, I know you were talking about how he's going to try to steal the election, and I just feel like Democrats haven't been doing enough about this. I mean, when we've had the chance, I mean, the first 2 years of Obama, I think he should have done more to fix the election system. But now Trump has the court systems loaded with right-wing judges, so not even just Kavanaugh, who threatens that the liberals will pay for bringing him to court like that. And we also have, I'm not sure, but can the local elections also bring to court and threaten the elections on a local level? I'm not sure.
The Constitution explicitly and clearly says, and federal law says, that the elections will be held on the first Tuesday following the first Monday of November. And
yes,
I don't know how you get around that, Leslie. I mean, we literally never have. We had the Civil War going, and we held elections on the first Tuesday.
No, I'm talking about when he denies the election and he brings suit against it the next day.
Oh, I see.
He denies that he lost. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, we had
loaded.
Yeah, we had Tom Perez, the chair of the DNC, was on here a while ago, and they've got lawyers. They're getting ready for this. I really think they are going to be ready for it, Leslie.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
But y'all know what he's going to do. He's going to claim that he got robbed, and he's going to have a faction of people who are going to follow him. And the question is, how does that play out? And welcome back, Robin in Kingston, Washington. Hey, Robin, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I'm just chipping in to share with you part of what you're talking about yesterday, and then why is Trump doing these things. And I sort of feel bad that I think a little bit like Steve Bannon, but I think I've got at least 3 of the planks that Trump is going to be using as November approaches. The thing of why he's raising or getting louder, as psychologists would say, about racism is we're still a majority white country, and we are still a very, very racist country, even though what we see in the streets of Black Lives Matter is a very hopeful sign. So I think that he's just trying to expand his base that way. The second thing is, and this is really going to upset you, but if the Fox News and Trump's oligarch media machine has their way, they could make him become a COVID-19 life-saving hero in October and November. And here is why: because they will flip not how many are dead or ill, but how many people Trump saved and how many people are still alive. I know that sounds perverse, but this is what they do. And then the third one is that by October, I believe that there will be some positive signs for the economy recovering somewhat. And so they will push out the meme, why change horses in midstream? So the solution to this... I
don't think any of that's going to work, Robin.
Oh, I don't know. I'm just saying to you, I think I know what they're going to try. And my solution is very simple, and that is it is well underway. And my perception on the 2020 election is it's going to be a male versus female voting structure, and there are like Women's March and so many women's groups who are getting women out to vote. That is the solution, and this is where the great grandmothers or the great-grandmothers, the great-great-grandmothers on the left and the mothers on the left can really get engaged and really make a huge difference, which is what I have been calling about for over 6 months now, by just working within their own families and other small groups to get out to vote. It's men versus women, and if you think it is anything other than that, I'm sorry. I predicted Trump was going to win in 2016. I'm seeing what they're going to try to do right now, and I am telling you what the solution is. Don't try to change men's minds. Get more women out to vote. That's all. Thanks, Tom.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Robin. I think, it's not just, I don't strongly disagree with anything Robin said, but I don't think that it's just like, hey, we need to get women out to vote. There are several groups that have been historically substantially underrepresented in our elections. But in particular, the group that I think is the most important in this election right now are people under 25, people between 18 and 25 who can legally vote, but by and large don't. And, they can turn this election. And they're the ones who are looking at, the possibility of global warming wiping out their future. They're the ones who are looking at student debt relief. They are the ones who are looking at no jobs. They're looking at, a lost generation. We're all this stuff. Anyhow, we'll be back with your calls in just a minute. Stick around. The Hidden History of Monopoly tells how Robert Bork, that guy from the Reagan era, transformed corporate America and destroyed the American dream.
So over at ThomHartmann.com, we just put up a new video for our supporters, the people who support our program, that talks about Malcolm X saying, if you're not careful, the newspapers will have you hating the people who are oppressed and loving the people who are the oppressors. He said that 55 years ago to, this month, February, 1965. And, what that actually means, how that warning from Malcolm X was apparently taken to heart by the Republican Party in 1981 through the Reagan presidency. And we actually saw this shift in America to the point where, that led to everything. Stop and frisk and the demonization of homeless people and the demonization of poor people and black people and Muslim people and all of this stuff came out of this very specific kind of Lee Atwater strategy in the 1980s. So you can find it over at ThomHartmann.com and check it out.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Is Donald Trump going to be told, no, you can't do that? I don't know. We'll see. There's some serious questions here, I think. Jonathan in Boston, Massachusetts. Hey, Jonathan, what's up?
How are you? Good. Just a question. To me, I actually have no issue with people being skeptical of the CDC, but my issue is if you're taking money from the pharmaceutical industry, which is very much tied into the CDC, how can you then judge, people wearing masks when you're part of the problem? So, but my question is, supposedly Trump just passed a lot of legislation lowering drug prices. And first of all, I just want to know, it's so hard to research whether he actually is taking money from the pharmaceutical industry. There was research showing that he did in 2016.
I think every politician in America is taking money from the pharmaceutical industry, Jonathan.
So how is he able? Did he actually lower drug prices? And how is he able to do that if he was?
Yeah, I don't know. Not my issue. Stephen in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Hey, Stephen, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, as a fellow SDS member of the 60s, I don't know if you were up in Ann Arbor or what part of Michigan back then, but
I was in East Lansing most of the time. I got to Ann Arbor a couple of times. In fact, I got arrested once in Ann Arbor. But yeah, anyhow, what's up?
Anyway, we're brothers, the same age, and we fought pretty hard for a lot of things we wanted to maintain as far as our democracy in those days. I don't think Donald Trump, if he was tried to stay in office, I don't think he would appreciate the nationwide strike that we would organize.
Yeah. So is that your point?
Well, my point is I think we let him rent too big of a space in our paranoid parts of our minds, because I think we have a strong coalition of people from our 60s and 70s era that remember what it's like to actually contribute positively to striking, getting out in the streets. We'll have a multi-million-man strike.
Yeah, well, hopefully you're right, Stephen. I'm a little more skeptical, but hopefully you're right. Gary in Inglewood, Florida. Hey, Gary, what's up?
Well, I just wanted to get back to the pandemic for a quick minute, and I live in Florida. You know how crazy it is here, but we were back at 30.
Gary?
Anyway, we were at 35,000. We shut down the whole country. And
right.
Now we're at 60, 70,000 a day, and they want to send our kids back to school. How low will you go? And they say, our kids, they won't get sick. The kids don't get sick, really. And, it's just in totally they have went off the deep end.
Yeah, you guys just had a 9-year-old girl down in Florida with no pre-existing conditions die of COVID.
Yeah, it's insanity.
Yeah, it really is. And the question is, how is Donald Trump going to use that to try to steal the election? Because we know he's going to try to steal the election because, frankly, it's the only way he can win is by cheating.
That's exactly what he's going to try to do.
Yeah, exactly. This is the problem Republicans have. The only way they can win is by cheating. So they've developed all these, from gerrymandering to throwing people off the voting rolls, all these ways to cheat. Oliver in Lombard, Illinois. Hey, Oliver, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Thanks for taking my call and thanks for what you do.
Sure.
My point would be regarding COVID. I see that even on your show, and definitely I see it on mainstream media, we are pointing out the number, when we talk about the number of deaths due to COVID, we are pointing out that the majority are black and brown people, and I think we are doing a huge disservice towards towards the black and brown community, because I'm a white guy and I live around white people, and when we point this out to us, it feels like the issue is not affecting us. We should talk about human lives lost. We should never point out black and brown people dying. And I saw CNN has a segment during the day. They always show people that we lost due to COVID, and both times they always show black and Hispanics. I don't know, there are not white people who are dying, and it feels like, I think,
black and brown people are dying at about twice the rate that white people are, and regionally there are places where it's 3 and 4 times the rate, but nationally it's around twice the rate, as I recall. And, part of that is black and brown people die of everything at about twice the rate that white people do. They are more likely to die of cancer. They're more likely to die of heart disease. They're more likely, pick your illness. This is what people are referring to when they talk about structural racism. And it's cooked into the system. And to deny that or to ignore that, Oliver, I think is to do a horrible disservice to the people who are the victims of it.
I agree, and I understand your point. The reason I'm saying, if we would point out, let's say, out of the 150,000 people that died, if we would say, hey, 30,000 people, white people died, we would say, wow, that's a huge number. But when we say 60% or 70%...
I get what you're saying, Oliver, and this has got to be a real balancing act for the media, too, because... you want a message to those, like the white idiots who are lining up right now without masks to hear Mike Pence speak. You want a message to them.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
Here's how I feel about
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Raycon earbuds. Stay at home with better sound. More info at buyraycon.com/Tom. Omega XL, which according to clinical research helps joints. More info at omegaxl.com/Tom. CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code Tom. The Clean Phone Pro, phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. Keeps hair loss treatment. More info at keeps.com/Tom. And Plexiderm Wrinkle Reducer. Real science, real results. More info at plexiderm.com, code Tom.
We say fight back!
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Unsettling Truths, the ongoing dehumanizing legacy of the doctrine of discovery by Mark Charles and Soon Chan Ra. This is from chapter 1. You cannot discover lands that are already inhabited. I, Mark, said this almost under my breath as I walked past a line of men dressed as Spanish sailors from the 1490s. I was in front of Union Station in Washington, D.C., near the massive statue of Christopher Columbus overlooking the United States Capitol. Every Columbus Day, there's an official ceremony in this plaza honoring Columbus as the discoverer of America. I had stumbled upon this ceremony by accident the year prior. There were a few non-natives holding signs and protesting the ceremony, but nothing very disruptive. I went back the following year primarily out of curiosity. I wasn't intending to protest, nor did I want to make a scene. As I walked up behind the statue and approached the group of men dressed as Spanish sailors, the words just came out of my mouth. You cannot discover lands already inhabited. As I walked further down the line, I said it again, this time a little louder. You cannot discover lands already inhabited. As I continued walking, I came to the front of the line where a group of men dressed in suits were standing. I repeated myself, making sure they could hear me. You cannot discover lands already inhabited. Suck it up, was the reply I heard as I kept walking. By this time, I'd walked around the statue and reached the front where a small stage had been erected and chairs set up for people to watch the ceremony. It hadn't started yet, but more than half the audience was seated waiting for it to begin. So I stopped near the center, turned toward the crowd, and in a calm but loud voice I said to the people, you cannot discover lands already inhabited. That process is known as stealing, conquering, or colonizing. The fact that America calls what Columbus did discovery reveals the implicit racial bias of the country, that Native Americans are not fully human. Quickly, one of the white men dressed in a suit walked over and interrupted me. You are not welcome here, he said as he grabbed my arm and began walking me away. I attempted to explain the inappropriateness of both celebrating this holiday as well as hosting this ceremony, but instead of engaging in conversation, he threatened me with arrest and escorted me from the area. As I walked away from the gathering, I was amused at his words and the irony of their context. A white man participating in a public ceremony honoring Christopher Columbus as the discoverer of America, telling a native man he was not welcome in that space. How did a flawed assumption about the place of the indigenous population in U.S. society become normative? How are assumptions so deeply ingrained in the American psyche and imagination that dysfunctional and oppressive actions emerge? How did a dysfunctional idea and worldview form that allows for the displacement of native bodies? One of the explanations for the formation of this dysfunctional worldview is the doctrine of discovery. The doctrine of discovery is a set of legal principles that govern the European colonizing powers, particularly during the administration of indigenous land, regarding the administration. It is the primary legal precedent that still controls native affairs and rights, and international law formulated in the 15th and 16th centuries. From a theological perspective, the legal and political role of the doctrine of discovery is rooted in a dysfunctional theological imagination that shaped the European colonial settler worldview. The doctrine emerged from a series of 15th century papal bulls, which are official decrees by the Pope that carry the full weight of his ecclesiastical office. On June 18, 1452, Pope Nicholas V issued the papal bull Dum Diversus, which initiated the first set of documents that would compose the doctrine of discovery. The official decree of the Pope granted permission to King Alfonso V of Portugal, quote, to invade, search out, capture, vanquish, and subdue all Saracens, Muslims, and pagans whatsoever, and other enemies of Christ wheresoever placed, and the kingdoms, dukedoms, principalities, dominions, possessions, and all movable and immovable goods whatsoever, held and possessed by them, and to reduce their persons to perpetual slavery, and to apply and appropriate to himself and his successors the kingdoms, dukedoms, counties, principalities, dominions, possessions, and goods, and to convert them to his or their use and profit. End of quote from Pope Nicholas's papal bull of 1452. Dum Diversus would identify the Saracens, a common term for Muslims at the time, and pagans, essentially identifying any non-Christians as others, as those who could be targeted for, quote, perpetual slavery. The papal bull intentionally used language that identified those outside the European Christian world and enforced the Western theological imagination of non-Europeans as other. The Portuguese took these ecclesiastical statements to heart and perpetrated the slave trade from the African continent to the European and the American continents. As a Christian ruler, the King of Portugal would have power endowed from the church to take possession of the other as slave labor from the continent of Africa. The pagan African body was just another commodity to be taken for the pleasure and profit of the European Christian body, the one made most fully in the image of God. In the January of 1454, Pope Nicholas authored another bull. The book is Unsettling Truths by Charles and Ra.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And what more appropriate guest to have on the day that we learned that the economy contracted by almost 33%, 32.9%, a record crash. I mean, this is Great Depression level. In fact, worse than Great Depression level, contraction of GDP, I believe. Then Professor Richard Wolff, the economist, co-founder of democracyatwork.info, author of numerous books, his most recent, Understanding Socialism, rdwolff2fs.com, as well his Twitter handle, Prof. Wolff. Professor Wolff, first of all, there was an AP NORC poll of businesses and that suggests that half of the jobs that have been lost in the last 6 months during the whole Trump virus thing will never come back. And that, we're going to fundamentally have to restructure our society. And then on top of that, we get this report today of this 32.9% plunge in GDP. Where do we go from here? What does this mean? How do we reinvent an economy?
Well, I think the first step has to be to put aside the level of denial that has accompanied what we've been going through for at least the last 15 weeks. It starts at the top with a studied effort to deny the pandemic, to deny the crash, and now to deny the scope of what it is we are going through. it boggles my mind. I am not the only one. But before we can talk about what has to come next, there has to be some kind of end to the make-believe, to the notion that we are in a place where fiddling around at the edges of our economic difficulties is adequate. I mean, that's what Republicans and Democrats alike have been doing. If you watch the debates these days, it is surrealistic. In the midst of a crash that is like the Greatest Depression of the 1930s, which was the greatest crash of capitalism until the one we're in now, you would imagine that you're on another planet. Really? In the depths of the Greatest Depression, you're going to reduce the amount of help you give to unemployed people when half their jobs are never coming back, as per your quotation, when the jobs that will be there will be under enormous pressure from the employer to cut wages, to cut benefits, to demand more time, a speedier process. The worst isn't the people who won't get a job. The worst is the people who will discover that the job they've had all along, or the one they're returning to, is going to be occurring in an economy that is geared up to take the most away from the mass of people as the way to get through it. Let me put it one other way. There is a phrase called class war. Americans are now going to have to understand that that's where we are, and that we are going into a period of time, whoever wins the presidency in November, of unparalleled historical conflict as we try to figure out who is going to have to give up what in order to reconstruct a functioning economy.
It's going to be a huge debate. It's going to be a huge issue. We have talked many times over the last years, Professor Wolff, about setting aside capitalism, reinventing capitalism, reinventing socialism. Kind of in the micro, turning businesses from for-profit capitalist enterprises into cooperatives, things like that. This seems so much larger and more structural than small fixes. I mean, this seems like it requires please, I'd love your thoughts on this. It seems to me like what we're facing right now is something that is even a greater crisis than the ones that Marx was addressing back in the 1860s. Where do we find, some solutions or some model that could work?
Well, I mean, that's the debate we're about to have. Let me try to give you some parameters or some dimensions of it. We live in a capitalist system in which the following governs what happens. Profit. Is it profitable for John or Mary or Bill to start a business, to build a business, to hire people, hire more people? The answer is always, in a capitalist system, we will do it if and insofar as it is profitable. You keep your job so long as your employer profits from selling what you help to produce. Here is the question then. Will that system that allows the decision about how many jobs are going to be created and what kind of world we live in to be determined by a subset of the population, the people in the business of making profits? And let's remember, profits are something employers are driven by, and employers are a very small minority of our total population. Are we as a society going to be willing to have our jobs, our income, our very lives in the hands of a minority driven by profit? Can we wait that long until it's profitable for us all to have a job? Can we wait that long until it's profitable to make our income in that job sufficient to raise a family under the conditions we thought were ours as American citizens? I fear that the answer to that question is no, that we are not going to wait indefinitely. We are not going to allow that minority to continue in that dominant position, because now they cannot deliver to us the jobs, the incomes, the rising standard of living that we thought was something somehow built into the United States. It is now going to be a period of time as Americans discover that what they have denied, namely that this system can break down, that this system may not be the best way to solve the problems of producing the goods and services and distributing them in a socially sustainable way, they're going to discover now that that's an open question, not a settled question, and then all bets are off, because the presumptions about our politics, about our culture, about the communities we live in are about to be undone as the implications of this crisis begin slowly to get stronger than our powers of denial have so far kept them from being.
And yet we've seen where government has replaced employers as the employer, presumably acting on behalf of the people, and it didn't work out all that well in East Germany or the Soviet Union.
Absolutely not, and it's not working out real well now. And you have to face then the reality that what they did in the Soviet Union or what they did elsewhere was to stay with the employer-employee relationship, changing who the employer was, not private citizens, but now government officials. And you're discovering, as you rightly say, I agree with you, that wasn't the solution either. So the question then is, can we change the very basic way we decide who works, what he or she works for, how they get paid, and we can't go on with the way we have been doing it, because that's what got us here.
Yeah, let's continue this conversation next week. It's brilliant.
Right.
Professor Richard Wolff, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Yeah, great talking with you.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
You can find Professor Wolff's writings and work over at rdwolff.com and also democracywork.info. And welcome back. Let's see here. Brian in Aliso Viejo, California. Am I saying that right?
Aliso Viejo. That's correct. Orange County.
Hey, what's up?
So, well, a wise man once said, democracy is not a spectator sport. We need to get active. So my question for you is, when it comes to making sure that the votes get certified in enough states that Joe Biden can get 271 plus electoral votes, isn't it basically the states that are either blue or purple states, the states that are crucial for a Biden victory, isn't it the states in which there is a Republican Secretary of State that we need to be worried about most?
I've been trying to dig through this, Brian, because I've had some people suggest to me that it's the governor who will make the decision about whether the vote is certified in that state. And you've got some states, like Michigan, for example, and Wisconsin, where you've got a Democratic governor, even though you have a Republican legislature. And if the vote was not certified, then the Republican legislature, gets to vote in the House, or have their vote be executed by their House delegation. And how this plays out under the 12th Amendment and under the voting law that was passed in 1877 after the election of 1876. Yeah, I'm still trying to get my arms around it. There's so many different pieces to this. I mean, you know, we've seen this happen once in our history. In 1876, in that election, the Democrat, Sam Tilden, not only won the majority of popular votes, he also won the majority of the electoral votes, yet he did not become president because you had three states that were occupied.
Yeah.
That's right. He didn't hit 50% plus one of the Electoral College, and that was because you had 4 states that refused to certify the vote. Oregon was occupied by the Klan. You had 3 southern states that were occupied by the Union Army, and in order to basically throw a wrench in the works, they all said, no, we're not going to, you know, the governors of those states said, no, we're not going to certify the vote, and boom, it gets thrown to the House of Representatives, and under the 12th Amendment, each state has one vote. That vote is determined not by the congressional delegation, but by the legislatures of the individual states. And we've got either 29 or 30 states, depending on how you parse it, where the majority of the House and Senate seats in those states are Republican, which would put Donald Trump back into the White House if it were to play out in a similar fashion to the election of 1876 when Rutherford Hayes, who lost both the popular vote and the electoral vote, became president. Now, there was some, there was a little more drama associated with that one because, you know, basically the way Hayes became president was he said, I will pull Union troops out of the South if the Democrats will go along with making me president. So basically they cut a deal. And that's why they had to pass that law the next year clarifying that it is the legislatures of the states who make those decisions, because the 12th Amendment was slightly ambiguous about all this stuff. And it hasn't been tested. It hasn't been adjudicated. It hasn't been run through the Supreme Court. This is why I said earlier, you know, John Roberts may be the one who ends up playing the largest role if that's what it comes down to. If you get, you know, Texas, Florida, and maybe one other Republican-controlled state where the governors say, you know, we've got so many mail-in ballots that are coming so late, we can't certify this election. Sorry, throw it into the House using the 12th Amendment. And at that point, you know, does Donald Trump get, quote, reelected? You know, it seems like that would be the case, Brian, but I'm still digging into it. We'll be back. Stick around. Lily Adams is going to be with us in just a moment. Daily rants and weekly op-eds at HartmanReport.com. It's free and there's no ads. HartmanReport.com. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And on the line with us is Lily Adams, the senior spokesperson and advisor to the DNC War Room. Democrats.org is the website. Lily's Twitter handle is AdamsLily, L-I-L-Y, or at DNC War Room or at the Democrats. Lily, welcome to the program. Thanks for joining us today. Tell us about the new ad that you guys have out.
Well, thanks for having me. Yeah, we just launched a new ad in Wisconsin and Michigan, which would be critical states this fall, basically to talk about the issue that's on a lot of parents' minds right now, which is whether schools are going to reopen and whether Trump is going to force schools to reopen without the proper testing, without the proper protective equipment for teachers. And we just know that, you know, parents do not trust this president to make that kind of decision, given how he's completely mismanaged the coronavirus crisis.
So what's your sense of how this is playing out? I mean, it certainly looks like we're looking at an absolute electoral disaster and blowout for Donald Trump. And yet he's, I mean, you know, his whole thing today, tweeting about let's postpone the elections. You know, you could see that as a cynical move to push off the headlines off the front page, a discussion about the worst economic crash in the history of the world happening on his watch. Or you could view that as his trying to, you know, one up the John Lewis funeral, or, you know, that he just like, he's got this list of things that he can just throw out there when he needs to divert people's attention. Or this could be the opening salvo of his attempts when the election happens to say, you know, I tried to postpone this. I tried to fix it. You've got, you've got a disaster going on here because we hobbled the post office and there's all these mail-in ballots that have not yet been received by the states. So, you know, how does, you know, what's your best sense? I mean, you're in the middle of this. You know, you're watching how this is happening. What's your best sense of what his strategy is going to be? And will the Republicans continue to support him in this kind of craziness?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I mean, look, we've seen him do this time and time again. We saw him do it 4 years ago where when he sees bad news, and the bad news that he got today is that 1.4 million more people made jobless claims, that the U.S. economy shrank by 32.9%, which is the single largest contraction of the U.S. economy on record. I mean, these are the headlines that he woke up to this morning. And so he tries to distract and sort of create a shiny object. But the problem is that the American people are not buying it. They know that their families are hurting. They know that their kids can't go back to school because he has bungled this crisis so badly. They know that friends and family and even themselves have lost their jobs because the president has completely screwed this up from day one. So I think the problem is that he used to do this and have some success, but now the American people just really aren't buying it. But I will tell you, and I think you were alluding to this, it is particularly insulting for him to do this and to talk about moving the election, which we know he can't do, on the day of John Lewis's memorial, which, you know, there are a few Americans who have given more to the protection of free and fair elections in this country than John Lewis.
Yeah, amen. Speak to the issue of race in the United States. My sense in 1988 was, and Lee Atwater actually bragged about this, that if George Herbert Walker Bush had not, in a desperate move, or maybe not desperate move, maybe just a cynical ploy, had not run the Willie Horton ads and characterized Michael Dukakis the way he was, had it not been basically for his shout out to white racists, he would not have been president. Had Ronald Reagan not given his first speech once he was nominated as the Republican candidate in 1980 in Philadelphia, Mississippi, down the road from where Schwermer and Goodman and Cheney were murdered, the civil rights workers, that, you know, Reagan wouldn't have been the nominee. He wouldn't have become president. That, you know, in fact, I would say that probably the only Republican who has run for president and not put a naked appeal to white racism at the center of his campaign was probably George W. Bush in 2000. And there are people who would argue that he was doing it as well. It was just far more subtle. But clearly Trump is, I mean, you know, his tweets yesterday about, you know, white suburban, you people, you know, I'm going to keep black people from coming into your neighborhood. He all but said it, right?
Yeah, he's
I think that, you know, white people, we have to acknowledge that racism is real in the white community. How big a role is that going to play?
Well, I mean, I think he has traded in, you know, a tried and true method of people in politics of racist dog whistles for racist bullhorns. I mean, he's not hiding this anymore, but we know he's a racist. He was a racist when he ran 4 years ago. He's a racist now. But, you know, I think the American people are tired of having a president who, you know, they see political wins by dividing folks. They see political wins by keeping people apart. And, you know, I think they just know that we're not going to build back better, as Joe Biden would say, if we're continuing to discriminate and to pit one group of folks in this country against another. You know, Joe Biden said it very well when he started this campaign, that this is a fight for the soul of our country. And I think we see that every single day, that we have to reject this kind of racist rhetoric from the White House, from Donald Trump. But increasingly, that's all he's got left.
Yeah. Lily, you're working with the DNC, you know, right in the middle of all this. We have just a minute till we're going to hit a hard break. But about 6 months ago, a friend of mine who is a Republican consultant in Washington, D.C., made the comment to me, Rutherford Hayes was not elected president of the United States, yet he served. And that sent me down this rabbit hole. Are you guys preparing and planning for if Donald Trump pulls some just wild-ass shenanigan, forgive my obscenity, some crazy shenanigan here?
Yeah, I mean, I think the Biden campaign and us at the Democratic Party are preparing for every single scenario to make sure not only that the results of the election are respected, but that every single American can vote. And so, you know, we'll be working really hard to do that from now until about 90 days from now on Election Day. Yeah, good. Lily Adams, senior spokesperson and advisor to the DNC War Room. Democrats.org is the website. Adams Lily is Lily's Twitter handle, DNC War Room as well. Lily, thanks so much for dropping by. It's great talking with you. Thank you. Great. Thank you very much. We'll be right back. It's 27 minutes. Coming up on 28 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of the news of the day and your calls as well in just a moment. Stick around.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
So, is he going to get away with it? We'll see. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Michael Lewis's new book, The Fifth Risk. And this is from the prologue, which is titled Lost in Transition. Chris Christie noticed a piece in the New York Times. That's how it all started. The New Jersey governor had dropped out of the presidential race in February 2016 and thrown what support he had behind Donald Trump. In late April, he saw the article. It described meetings between representatives of the remaining candidates still in the race: Trump, John Kasich, Ted Cruz, Hillary Clinton, and Bernie Sanders, and the Obama White House. Anybody who still had any kind of shot at becoming president of the United States apparently needed to start preparing to run the federal government. The guy Trump sent to the meeting was, in Christie's estimations, comically underqualified. Christie called up Trump's campaign manager, Corey, to ask why this critical job hadn't been handed to someone who actually knew something about government. Lewandowski said, "We don't have anyone." Christie volunteered himself for the job, head of the Donald Trump presidential transition team. "It's the next best thing to being president," he told friends. "You get to plan the presidency." He went to see Trump about it. Trump said he didn't want a presidential transition team. Why did anyone need to plan anything before he actually became president? "It's legally required," said Christie. Trump asked where the money was going to come from to pay for the transition team. Christie explained that Trump could either pay for it himself or take it out of campaign funds. Trump didn't want to pay for it himself, and he didn't want to take it out of campaign funds either, but he agreed grudgingly that Christie could go ahead and raise a separate fund to pay for his transition team. But not too much, he said. And so Christie set out to prepare for the unlikely event that Donald Trump would one day be elected president of the United States. Not everyone in Trump's campaign was happy to see him on the job. In June, Christie received a note from Trump advisor Paul Manafort. "The kid is paranoid about you," Manafort said. The kid was Jared Kushner, Trump's son-in-law. Back in 2005, when he was U.S. Attorney for the District of New Jersey, Christie had prosecuted and jailed Kushner's father, Charles, for tax fraud. Christie's investigation revealed in the bargain that Charles Kushner had hired a prostitute to seduce his own brother-in-law, whom he suspected of cooperating with Christie, had videotaped the sexual encounter and sent the tape to his sister. The Kushners apparently took their grudges seriously, and Christie sensed that Jared still harbored one against him. On the other hand, Trump, whom Christie considered almost a friend, couldn't have cared less. He'd invited Christie to his and Melania's wedding, and he pressed him to attend his daughter Ivanka and Jared Kushner's wedding. "That would be awkward," said Christie. "I'm paying for the wedding, and I don't give an S," said Donald. Christie viewed Jared as one of those people who thinks that because he's rich, he must also be smart. Still, he had a certain cunning about him. And Christie soon found himself reporting everything he did to prepare for a Trump administration to an executive committee. The committee consisted of Jared, Ivanka Trump, Donald Trump Jr., Eric Trump, Paul Manafort, Steve Mnuchin, and Jeff Sessions. "I'm kind of like the church elder who double counts the collection plate every Sunday for the pastor," said Sessions, who appeared uncomfortable with the entire situation. The elder's job became more complicated in July 2016 when Trump was formally named the Republican nominee. The transition team now moved into an office in downtown Washington, D.C. and went looking for people to occupy the top 500 jobs in the federal government. They needed to fill all of the cabinet positions, of course, but also a whole bunch of others that no one in the Trump campaign even knew existed. It's not obvious how you find the next Secretary of State, much less the next Secretary of Transportation. Never mind who should sit on the Board of Trustees of the Barry Goldwater Scholarship and Excellence in Education Foundation. By August, 130 people were showing up every day, and hundreds more working part-time at Trump Transition headquarters at the corner of 17th Street and Pennsylvania Avenue. The transition team made lists of likely candidates for all 500 jobs.
plus other lists of informed people to roll into the various federal agencies the day after the election to be briefed on whatever the federal agencies were doing. They gathered the names for these lists by traveling the country and talking to people, Republicans who had served in government, Trump's closest advisors, recent occupants of the jobs that needed filling. Then they set about investigating any candidates for glaring flaws and embarrassing secrets and conflicts of interest. At the end of each week, Christie handed over binders with lists of names of people who might do the job well to Jared and Donald and Eric and the others. They probed everything, says a senior Trump transition official. Who is this person? Where did this person come from? They only ever rejected one person, Paul Manafort's secretary. The first time Donald Trump paid attention to any of this was when he read about it in the newspaper. The story revealed that Trump's very own transition team, led by New Jersey Governor Chris Christie, had raised several $1 million to pay for its own staff. The moment he saw it, Trump called Steve Bannon, the chief executive of his campaign, from his office on the 26th floor of the Trump Tower and told him to come immediately to his residence many floors above. Bannon stepped off the elevator to find the governor of New Jersey seated on a sofa, being hollered at. Trump was apoplectic, actually yelling, "You're stealing my money! You're stealing my effing money! What the F is this?" Seeing Bannon, Trump turned on him and screamed, "Why are you letting him steal my effing money?" Bannon and Christie together set out to explain to Trump federal law. Months, and it continues from there. The book is The Fifth Risk by Michael Lewis.
Revolution concerning news that we may have hit a tipping point for methane in the Arctic. Professor Richard Wolff drops by to discuss a pandemic tax to help fund the COVID-19 recovery for the common good. Kevin Camps of Beyond Nuclear visits to connect the FBI raids of the Ohio House Speaker to the billion-dollar bailout of two very dangerous, age-degraded nuclear power plants. And in Geeky Science, there's a new study out about how sitting confuses your body's fat or fit system. Find the Science Revolution wherever fine podcasts are available. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, picking up your phone calls. Harriet in New York City. Hey, Harriet, what's on your mind today?
Yes. Hello, Tom. I'd like to know what you think will be the fate of the African Americans in this country, given the rise of what seems to me to be fascism, because that turned ultimately into Nazism. We are disproportionately affected by this virus, and that's being, I could see that being manipulated in many, many ways. And there is a kind of consciousness in this country where whites could turn to the right, and we could end up in a situation quite like that of Germany.
Yes, you could be the Jews essentially of the 1930s
yes.
and 1940s Germany. This is where I think it's really important that we all realize that at this level of conversation, Harriet, and I think you've touched on the most important piece of the whole thing, that we're all in this together, regardless of race, regardless of gender, regardless of class, regardless of anything. And it's one of the things that concerns me is I'm seeing it here in Portland, for example, being played out, where we started out protesting the death of George Floyd and police brutality against black people. Then Trump sends his fascist cops in, and the nature of the protest shifts somewhat to not just be about killing black people, but also to be an open defiance of fascism. And then there's pushback coming from some folks in the black community saying, but wait a minute, this is supposed to be about black people being killed by police. And then you've got some white people going, but, yeah, and that's a huge issue, and we're all upset about fascism. And you just knit the two together perfectly, Harriet. I mean, if fascism takes over this country in a full and complete way, it's going to be George Wallace-style fascism. It's going to be fascism that puts black and brown people right in the middle of the bullseye. They are not separate issues. And And it just makes me crazy when people try to separate these. And anyway, what are your thoughts on that?
I think that it's a very real concern. I've been thinking about genocide in relationship to this country for a very long time. I never thought that I might see it materialize, but I'm very conscious of the nature of the human being in the office at the moment, and also the underlying degree of racism that's existed in this country from its inception, not only for African Americans, but for Native Americans and anything that really is other than a notion of American Aryanism.
Yeah, and we have to remember that this country was literally birthed in genocide, and this was,
Yes.
this preceded slavery, the murder of African Americans, or excuse me, of Native Americans, and
That's right.
and just a systematic, multi-century. I mean, this was over a 4-century period, of extermination. Right up until the 1970s. You had governments, state governments in the United States, sterilizing Native American women.
That's right.
And of course, this was done to African Americans too, to a smaller extent. But this is part of the DNA of this country. And anybody who thinks that it can't happen here is living in la la land. Harriet, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. Thanks for raising, I think, probably the most important point that's been made all week. Harriet, thank you so much. Danny in Inglewood, Colorado. Hey, Danny, what's on your mind today?
Hey, hi, Tom. Hey, I just wanted to state the fact that, everybody's going to focus on the 33% drop in the GDP, which is, huge and horrible. But Trump is quick to brag about the small things, but missing is the fact that the first quarter was down 3% too. And that's why now officially, we're in a recession. And if you listen to his brag, we were okay up into the virus, but no, the economy was already starting to shrink. And so
you're right. You're right.
Yeah,
the recession had begun before we had a single death from the virus in the United States, and everybody ignores that or overlooks that or forgets that, or it was never even well publicized. But the market was starting to shrink, and it's Fed intervention that has brought this together. And and I get it also that these measurements, it's not literally the second quarter, that there's a bit of a time shift in these statistics because of the time it takes to gather them and all those kind of things. But anyhow, Barack Obama is starting to speak right now at the funeral of John Lewis, and if we can go to him, I don't know if you can pull that off. Let's do it. I am not hearing President Obama.
James wrote to the believers. Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, lacking nothing. It is a great honor to be back in Ebenezer Baptist Church, in the pulpit of its greatest pastor, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., to pay my respects to perhaps his finest disciple, an American whose faith was tested again and again to produce a man of pure joy and unbreakable perseverance. John Robert Lewis. to those who have spoken, to Presidents Bush and Clinton, Madam Speaker, Reverend Warnock, Reverend King, John's family, friends, his beloved staff, Mayor Bottoms. I've come here today because I, like so many Americans, owe a great debt to John Lewis and his forceful vision of freedom. You know, this country is a constant work in progress. We're born with instructions to form a more perfect union. Explicit in those words is the idea that we're imperfect, that what gives each new generation purpose is to take up the unfinished work of the last and carry it further than any might have thought possible. John Lewis, first of the Freedom Riders, head of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, youngest speaker at the March on Washington, leader of the march from Selma to Montgomery, member of Congress representing the people of this state and this district for 33 years, mentor to young people, including me at the time, until his final day on this earth. He not only embraced that responsibility, but he made it his life's work, which isn't bad for a boy from Troy. John was born into modest means. That means he was poor. In the heart of the Jim Crow South, to parents who picked somebody else's cotton. Apparently, he didn't take to farm work. On days when he was supposed to help his brothers and sisters with their labor, he'd hide under the porch and make a break for the school bus when it showed up. His mother, Willie Mae Lewis, nurtured that curiosity in this shy, serious child. Once you learn something, she told her son,
to Thom Hartmann.
Once you get something inside your head, no one can take it away from you.
President Barack Obama giving the eulogy at John Lewis's funeral.
The boy John listened through the door after bedtime. His father's friends complained about the claim. One Sunday as a teenager, he heard Dr. King preach on the radio. As a college student in Tennessee, he signed up for Jim Lawson's workshops on the tactic of nonviolent civil disobedience. John Lewis was getting something inside his head, an idea he couldn't shake, took hold of him, that nonviolent resistance and civil disobedience were the means to change laws, but also change hearts and change minds and change nations and change the world. So he helped organize the Nashville campaign in 1960. He and other young men and women sat at a segregated lunch counter, well-dressed, straight back, refusing to let a milkshake poured on their heads or a cigarette extinguished on their backs or a foot aimed at their ribs. Refused to let that dent their dignity and their sense of purpose. And after a few months, the Nashville campaign achieved the first successful desegregation of public facilities in any major city in the South. John got a taste of jail for the first, second, third, well, several times. But he also got a taste of victory, and it consumed him with righteous purpose. And he took the battle deeper into the South. And that same year, just weeks after the Supreme Court ruled that the segregation of interstate bus facilities was unconstitutional, John and Bernard Lafayette bought 2 tickets, climbed aboard a Greyhound, sat up front, and refused to move. This was months before the first official freedom rides. He was doing a test. Trip was unsanctioned. Few knew what they were up to. And at every stop through the night, apparently, the angry driver stormed out of the bus and into the bus station. And John and Bernard had no idea what he might come back with or who he might come back with. Nobody was there to protect them. There were no camera crews to record events. Sometimes, Rev, we read about this and we kind of take it for granted, or at least we act as if it was inevitable. Imagine the courage of 2 people Malia's age, younger than my oldest daughter, on their own, to challenge an entire infrastructure of oppression. John was only 20 years old, but he pushed all 20 of those years to the center of the table, betting everything, all of it, that his example could challenge centuries of convention and generations of brutal violence and countless daily indignities suffered by African Americans.
President Obama is giving the eulogy for John Lewis here.
Like John the Baptist, Atlanta, preparing the way. Like those Old Testament prophets speaking truth to kings. John Lewis did not hesitate, and he kept on getting on board buses and sitting at lunch counters, got his mugshot taken again and again, marched again and again on a mission to change America. Spoke to 250,000 people at the March on Washington when he was just 23. Helped organize the Freedom Summer in Mississippi when he was just 24. At the ripe old age of 25, John was asked to lead the march from Selma to Montgomery. He was warned that Governor Wallace had ordered troopers to use violence. But he and Hosea Williams and others led them across that bridge anyway. And we've all seen the film and the footage and the photographs. President Clinton mentioned the trench coat, the knapsack, the book to read, the apple to eat, the toothbrush. Apparently, jails weren't big on such creature comforts. And you look at those pictures, and John looks so young, and he's small in stature, looking every bit that shy, serious child that his mother had raised, and yet He's full of purpose. God's put perseverance in it. And we know what happened to the marchers that day. Their bones were cracked by billy clubs, their eyes and lungs choked with tear gas. They knelt to pray, which made their heads easier targets. And John was struck in the skull, and he thought he was going to die. Surrounded by the sight of young Americans gagging and bleeding and trampled. Victims in their own country of state-sponsored violence. And the thing is, I imagine initially that day, the troopers thought they'd won the battle. You can imagine the conversations they had afterwards. You can imagine them saying, yeah, we showed them. They figured they'd turn the protesters back over the bridge, that they'd preserved a system that denied the basic humanity of their fellow citizens. Except this time there were some cameras there. This time the world saw what happened, bore witness to black Americans who were asking for nothing more than to be treated like other Americans, who were not asking for special treatment, just equal treatment, promised to them a century before, and almost another century before that. And when John woke up and checked himself out of the hospital, he would make sure the world saw a movement that was, in the words of Scripture, hard-pressed on every side, but not crushed. Perplexed, but not in despair. Persecuted, but not abandoned. Struck down, but not destroyed. So he returned to Brown Chapel, a battered prophet, bandages around his head. And he said, more marchers will come now. And the people came. And the troopers parted. And the marchers reached Montgomery. And their words reached the White House. And Lyndon Johnson, son of the South, said, we shall overcome. And the Voting Rights Act was signed into law. The life of John Lewis was in so many ways exceptional. It vindicated the faith in our founding, redeemed that faith. That most American of ideas, the idea that any of us, ordinary people without rank or wealth or title or fame, can somehow point out the imperfections of this nation and come together and challenge the status quo and decide that it is in our power to remake this country that we love until it more closely aligns with our highest ideals. What a radical idea. What a revolutionary notion. This idea that any of us, ordinary people, a young kid from Troy, can stand up to the powers and
We'll be back
principalities
after the top of the hour.
This isn't right. This isn't true. This isn't just.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
We can do better. On the battlefield of justice, Americans like John, Americans like Reverends Lowry and C.T. Vivian, 2 other patriots that we lost this year, liberated all of us that many Americans came to take for granted. America was built by people like them. America was built by John Lewis's. He, as much as anyone in our history, brought this country a little bit closer to our highest ideals. And someday, when we do finish that long journey towards freedom, when we do form a more perfect union, whether it's years from now or decades, or even if it takes another 2 centuries, John Lewis will be a founding father of that fuller, fairer, better America. And yet, as exceptional as John was, here's the thing: John never believed that what he did was more than any citizen of this country can do. I mentioned in the statement the day John passed, the thing about John was just how gentle and humble he was. And despite this storied, remarkable career, he treated everyone with kindness and respect, because it was innate to him, this idea that any of us can do what he did if we're willing to persevere. He believed that in all of us there exists the capacity for great courage, that in all of us there's a longing to do what's right, that in all of us there's a willingness to love all people and to extend to them their God-given rights to dignity and respect. So many of us lose that sense. It's taught out of us. We start feeling as if, in fact, we can't afford to extend kindness or decency to other people, that we're better off if we're above other people and looking down on them. And so often that's encouraged in our culture. But John always said, he always saw the best in us. And he never gave up and never stopped speaking out because he saw the best in us. He believed in us even when we didn't believe in ourselves. And as a congressman, he didn't rest. He kept getting himself arrested. As an old man, he didn't sit out any fight. Sat in all night long on the floor of the United States Capitol. I know his staff was stressed. But the testing of his faith produced perseverance. He knew that the march is not over, that the race is not yet won, that we have not yet reached that blessed destination where we are judged by the content of our character. He knew from his own life that progress is fragile, that we have to be vigilant against the darker currents of this country's history, of our own history, with their whirlpools of violence and hatred and despair that can always rise again. Bull Connor may be gone, but today we witness with our own eyes police officers kneeling on the necks of black Americans. George Wallace may be gone, but we can witness our federal government sending agents to use tear gas and batons against peaceful demonstrators. We may no longer have to guess the number of jelly beans in a jar in order to cast a ballot. But even as we sit here, there are those in power who are doing their darndest to discourage people from voting by closing polling locations and targeting minorities and students with restrictive ID laws and attacking our voting rights with surgical precision, even undermining the Postal Service in the run-up to an election that's going to be dependent on mail-in ballots so people don't get sick. Now, I know this is a celebration of John's life. There are some who might say we shouldn't dwell on such things. But that's why I'm talking about it. John Lewis devoted his time on this earth fighting the very attacks on democracy and what's best in America that we're seeing circulate right now. He knew that every single one of us has a God-given power, and that the fate of this democracy depends on how we use it. That democracy isn't automatic. It has to be nurtured. It has to be tended to. We have to work at it. It's hard. And so he knew that it depends on whether we summon a measure, just a measure of John's moral courage to question what's right and what's wrong and call things as they are. He said that as long as he had a breath in his body, he would do everything he could to preserve this democracy. And as long as we have breath in our bodies, we have to continue his cause.
This
if we want our children
Thom
to grow
Hartmann
up
Program
in a democracy,
Barack Obama
Not
speaking
just
at John Lewis's funeral.
with elections,
He's delivering
but
the eulogy.
a true democracy, a representative democracy, in a big-hearted, tolerant, vibrant, inclusive America of perpetual self-creation, then we're going to have to be more like John. We don't have to do all the things he had to do because he did them for us. But we got to do something. As the Lord instructed Paul, do not be afraid. Go on speaking. Do not be silent, for I am with you. And no one will attack you to harm you, for I have many in this city who are my people. It's just, everybody's got to come out and vote. We got all those people in the city, but they can't do nothing. Like John, we've got to keep getting into that good trouble. He knew that nonviolent protest is patriotic. a way to raise public awareness and put a spotlight on injustice and make the powers that be uncomfortable. Like John, we don't have to choose between protests and politics. It's not an either-or situation. It's a both-and situation. We have to engage in protests where that's effective, but we also have to translate our passion and our causes into laws, institutional practices. That's why John ran for Congress 34 years ago. Like John, we've got to fight even harder for the most powerful tool that we have, which is the right to vote. The Voting Rights Act is one of the crowning achievements of our democracy. That's why John crossed that bridge. That's why he spilled his blood. And by the way, it was the result of Democratic and Republican efforts. President Bush, who spoke here earlier, and his father signed its renewal when they were in office. President Clinton didn't have to because it was the law when he arrived, so instead he made a law to make it easier for people to register to vote. But once the Supreme Court weakened the Voting Rights Act, some state legislators unleashed a flood of laws designed specifically to make voting harder, especially, by the way, state legislators where there's a lot of minority turnout and population growth. That's not necessarily a mystery or an accident. It was an attack on what John fought for. It was an attack on our democratic freedoms. And we should treat it as such. If politicians want to honor John, and I'm so grateful for the legacy and work of all the congressional leaders who are here, but there's a better way than a statement calling him a hero. You want to honor John? Let's honor him by revitalizing the law that he was willing to die for. And by the way, naming it the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, that is a fine tribute. But John wouldn't want us to stop there, just trying to get back to where we already were. Once we pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, we should keep marching to make it even better by making sure every American is automatically registered to vote, including former inmates who've earned their second chance. By adding polling places and expanding early voting and making Election Day a national holiday. So if you are somebody who's working in a factory, or you're a single mom who's got to go to her job and doesn't get time off, you can still cast your ballot by guaranteeing that every American citizen has equal representation in our government, including the American citizens who live in Washington, D.C. and in Puerto Rico. They're Americans. By ending some of the partisan gerrymandering so that all voters have the power to choose their politicians, not the other way around. And if all this takes eliminating the filibuster, another Jim Crow relic, in order to secure the God-given rights of every American, then that's what we should do. Now, even if we do all this, even if every bogus voter suppression law is struck off the books today, we've got to be honest with ourselves that too many of us choose not to exercise the franchise. Too many of our citizens believe their vote won't make a difference, or they buy into the cynicism that, by the way, is the central strategy of voter suppression, to make you discouraged, to stop believing in your own power. So we're also going to have to remember what John said. If you don't do everything you can do to change things, then they will remain the same. You only pass this way once. You have to give it all you have. As long as young people are protesting in the streets, hoping real change takes hold, I'm hopeful, but we can't casually abandon them at the ballot box. Not when few elections have been as urgent on so many levels as this one. We can't treat voting as an errand to run if we have some time. We have to treat it as the most important action we can take on behalf of democracy. And like John, we have to give it all we have. I was proud that John Lewis was a friend of mine. I met him when I was in law school. He came to speak. And I went up and I said, Mr. Lewis, you are one of my heroes. What inspired me more than anything as a young man was to see what you and Reverend Lawson, Bob Moses, and Diane Nash, and others did. And he got that kind of, oh shucks, thank you very much. Next time I saw him, I'd been elected to the United States Senate. And I told him, John, I'm here because of you.
President Obama giving the eulogy for John Lewis.
On Inauguration Day in 2008, 2009.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
He was one of the first people I greeted and hugged on that stand. And I told him, this is your day too. He was a good and kind and gentle man. And he believed in us, even when we don't believe in ourselves. And it's fitting that the last time John and I shared a public forum was on Zoom. And I'm pretty sure neither he nor I set up the Zoom call because we didn't know how to work it. There's a virtual town hall with a gathering of young activists who had been helping to lead this summer's demonstrations in the wake of George Floyd's death. And afterwards, I spoke to John privately, and he could not have been prouder to see this new generation of activists standing up for freedom and equality, a new generation that was intent on voting and protecting the right to vote. In some cases, a new generation running for political office. And I told him, all those young people, John, of every race and every religion, from every background and gender and sexual orientation, John, those are your children. They learned from your example, even if they didn't always know it. They had understood through him what American citizenship requires, even if they'd only heard about his courage through the history books. by the thousands, faceless, anonymous, relentless young people, black and white, have taken our whole nation back to those great wells of democracy which were dug deep by the founding fathers in the formulation of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. Dr. King said that in the 1960s, and it came true again this summer. We see it outside our windows in big cities and rural towns, in men and women, young and old, straight Americans and LGBTQ Americans, blacks who long for equal treatment, and whites who can no longer accept freedom for themselves while witnessing the subjugation of their fellow Americans. We see it in everybody doing the hard work of overcoming complacency, of overcoming our own fears and our own prejudices, our own hatreds. You see it in people trying to be better, truer versions of ourselves. And that's what John Lewis teaches us. That's where real courage comes from. Not from turning on each other, but by turning towards one another. Not by sowing hatred and division, but by spreading love and truth. Not by avoiding our responsibilities to create a better America and a better world, but by embracing those responsibilities with joy and perseverance, and discovering that in our beloved community, we do not walk alone. What a gift John Lewis was. We are all so lucky to have had him walk with us for a while.
President Obama delivering the eulogy for John Lewis.
God bless you all. God bless America. God bless this gentle soul who pulled it closer to its promise. Thank you very much.
In fact, you just wrapped it up. That was brilliant, and it was absolutely brilliant. And one of the things that I thought was fascinating was how, and you probably don't know this because nobody was breaking away from from President Obama's speech, his eulogy, but right after Obama started speaking, when he basically went there, he talked about protesters being beaten and essentially was calling out Trump for his fascism. Trump, well, here's the headlines. This is over at Raw Story. Trump calls reporters to the White House for surprise event as Obama delivers eulogy for John Lewis. And then there's all these tweets from these various reporters. Caitlin Collins, the White House press pool, has just abruptly been called to gather. Trump has nothing on his schedule for another 90 minutes, but here we go. Paula Reed, President Trump called on his... he was trying to step on President Obama. And there were all these tweets saying to the D.C. press corps, do not carry Trump live when he tries to step on Obama. Louise and I were literally in the room when President Obama dismantled, took apart, disassembled Donald Trump. It was in 2011, as I recall, and it was the White House Correspondents' Dinner. We were there with, we were guests of Ellen Ratner in Talk Radio News. She was a regular in our program until her retirement a year or so ago. And, we were not that far away from Donald Trump. And I could see him, I could see everybody at his table. Obama started telling jokes, and then also Will, what was Will's last name? The comedian that they had. He also really laid into Donald Trump, and at first, the first couple jokes, some of the people at Trump's table, now Trump was sitting there with his arms crossed over his chest, you know, with a grim look on his face. And the first couple of jokes, a few people at his table laughed, and Trump glared at them, and they all got just super stone face. It's like, whoa. And I am convinced to this day that not only did Donald Trump see running for president as an opportunity to increase his pay for the Apprentice show, but that he wanted revenge on Barack Obama. And that's the main reason why he has done his absolute best to literally, I mean, step by step, methodically, and right out in front of everybody, I mean, essentially saying so, dismantle anything that was an accomplishment of the Obama administration. And particularly, I mean, it's why he and 22 Republican governors right now are suing before the Supreme Court to end Obamacare, to do away with protections against pre-existing conditions, to do away with, Obamacare isn't perfect by any means, but to do away with all that stuff. This is a very small man, this guy sitting in the White House. And he's got a very large virus named after him. The Trump virus has become a real problem for Donald Trump and for his buddies. And I suppose that's probably a good thing. That. Meanwhile, there's a youth group, Trump youth group, that it's called Turning Point USA. It's one of these ones, funded by, a bunch of right-wing billionaires. And they've been, they have tweeted pictures that were like putting down people who are wearing masks, ridiculing people who are wearing masks. They are now aggressively deleting those tweets because the co-founder of their organization just died of COVID. Herman Cain just died of COVID. Herman Cain, of course, 11 days before his diagnosis, was at Trump's Tulsa rally, sitting with a bunch of people who didn't have masks on. He didn't have a mask on. Surprise, surprise, he got COVID. I want to dig into this in some depth next week, but this virus is going to change our lives. It's going to change not just our lives in this moment and in this generation. It's going to change, it is in the process of changing. But it's going to take a couple of years. But it is going to change the nature of our society and our culture. And I really got that last weekend when our daughter and our grandson came over, and her partner. And the three of us sat down on the beach. We're all wearing masks, and our grandson never tried to come over and hug us. He has figured out at the age of 2 that you give people space. And he always, and he wore his mask through the whole thing. I mean, he's just a little trooper. But he's growing up in a very different world than the world that I grew up in, and the world that you grew up in. And this is gonna change a lot of things for a long, long time. We're seeing this case in Vietnam. Vietnam had gone like 3 months without a single case. And they opened up parts of the country to tourism, to internal tourism. And Da Nang is the main city where this was happening. And tens of thousands of tourists came to Da Nang, and then now they've got this outbreak of COVID. They can't figure out where it came from. And they're assuming it has to be somebody who flew in from another country and whose case of coronavirus survived a quarantine or whatever it may be. And they're freaking out. And it's like, they had thought, okay, we've got this thing under control. This is a country of 90 million people. This is not some little country someplace. But they had this under control. And I think, barring, a polio level, smallpox level, worldwide successful vaccination effort, which I'm very skeptical of, given that this coronavirus is, so resistant to things like vaccines. We've never successfully developed a vaccine for coronavirus. We couldn't do it for SARS, couldn't do it for MERS, couldn't do it for the common cold. That, things are going to be very different going forward. And we're going to have to think about reinventing government and culture and society and our economy and our everything.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Anyhow, we'll be digging into that next week. Tomorrow will be Anything Goes Friday. I'll pick up your phone calls right after this. It's coming up on 28 minutes past the hour.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Health Justice Now, Single Payer and What Comes Next by Timothy Faust. And this is from the introduction. A secret scream rings through America. It rings down the sterile fluorescent hallways of our hospitals. It rings over our rural towns and our native reservations. It rings through our prisons, the bellies of our great cities. It rings in our farms, in our fields, our streets and our sewers, our bodies and our blood. And we are cursed to never hear it clearly until, at last, we realize it has been our own mouth screaming and we are lost. A child born today inherits, in that secret, a new American squalor, the skeletal remains of the American cities, the bleached bones of the American suburbs. This secret is a birthright of continual exploitation, pumped for labor and drained of cash and then punished for the resulting suffering. Punished for being hungry, punished for being sick, punished for being pregnant, punished for being poor, punished for being black or brown, punished for being queer, for being unlucky, for being. At the base of that suffering is lodged a little truth, like a knot in the stomach. In America, sickness makes you poor, and poorness makes you sick. This is a book about that relationship and why it happens, and why it's unnecessary, and what we can do to fix it. The cosmic whirling of God's great slot machine has not determined that some people are fated to suffer while others flourish. We have the resources to take care of everyone, and yet we refuse to do so. Your medical debt and medical bills are unnecessary, but we have chosen to make them necessary. These are structural problems with structural causes, and many of them share roots in how we pay for health care. This is a book about health care and health finance. They are different. Healthcare is anything that helps you stay safe and healthy. It's a kind of freedom from and within your own body. Health finance is the method by which we as a country pay for that freedom and by which we decide who gets to have it and who doesn't. Healthcare is more than what happens to you in the hospital. Healthcare is whether your home makes you sick, or your food makes you sick, or your environment makes you sick, or whether you have enough money to afford the things that keep you healthy. In America, the structure of corporate health care has convinced us that some people deserve health care and some people don't. This is a book about that corporate health finance, about private insurance and private insurers. For half a century, they've convinced us that they're the only things that keep us or could ever keep us from the utter financial ruination of illness. They've sold us different inadequate insurance plans and persuaded us that this is a form of great liberty, while chipping away at our freedoms for profit and holding our bodies and our children's bodies hostage. This is a book about single-payer health care, a health finance model in which we pool our abundant collective resources to provide health care to all people. It is a common model across the world. As we will discuss in this book, we have the potential not just to enact a single-payer program in America, but to build the greatest healthcare program among any so-called developed democracy. Here is my profession of faith. I believe beyond any doubt that single payer is demonstrably sound and imminently feasible. I believe a properly ambitious and well-structured single-payer program will do more than any other American social program of this generation to soothe the burns, to resuscitate the spirit, to nourish the moral will of the American people. I believe it will loosen the loathsome manacles of American health finance, an exploitative institution that profits by plundering from us our own bodily autonomy, and that anchors a larger exploitation that holds those whom we love as captive leverage to guarantee our servitude to abusive employers or domestic partners, to those who seek to dominate us both in the office and in the hospital. I believe this nation owes its people, whose labor has created its rich banquet, the safety and agency of health care. I believe this health care is greater in scope than that which happens upon an operating table. I believe that housing, food, income, and more, the components of basic human dignity, are health care. And I believe our work is that of striving toward justice for all people. And I therefore believe, I have to believe, that single-payer health care is our moral imperative. Single-payer is our tool. Single-payer is our weapon. Single-payer is our first step. But single-payer on its own is not the goal. This book is about health justice. Healthcare is personal, so I want to start this book personally by introducing two friends of mine, Steve Way and Kyle Kolick. They're two guys about my age, I'm 30, who live in North New Jersey. They're sweet, gentle people, and probably the most charismatic pair of friends I've met in my entire life. They make me laugh until my face hurts, and we like watching pro wrestling together. They're also being utterly broken by our American healthcare system, and it's keeping them from living their lives. Steve has muscular dystrophy. The muscle and tissues that hold his body together are eating themselves. He's doing pretty good, all things considered. He beat his original life expectancy of 18, and now probably has a long life ahead of him. Steve needs a wheelchair to move and a ventilator to help him breathe. The book, Health Justice Now, Timothy Faust.
COVID-19 recovery for the common good. Kevin Camps of Beyond Nuclear visits to connect the FBI raids of the Ohio House Speaker to the billion-dollar bailout of two very dangerous, age-degraded nuclear power plants. And in Geeky Science, there's a new study out about how sitting confuses your body's fat or fit system. Find the Science Revolution wherever fine podcasts are available. Hey, we have a brand new video up at thomhartmann.com for the people who are subscribers or supporters to our program. And this one's about national health insurance and why and how we really need a single-payer national health care system, whether you call it Medicare for all or you call it single-payer or you call it whatever. Medicare for all, it has a lot of appeal because generally speaking, Medicare is positively viewed. That's what they call it in Canada. It's called Medicare. And, which makes sense, care for people using medicine. We would save at least $150 billion a year just on billing. You've got hospitals in the United States that have entire floors devoted to billing. Hospitals in Canada have one desk with, one or two people sitting at that desk, handling the billing. It's just crazy. And people would get better care, they get more comprehensive care, our entire nation gets healthier, and there's a whole bunch of essentially bullet points to build this argument for Medicare for all over at thomhartmann.com. You can check it out right now. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And there's some interesting news that having to do with protecting meatpacking workers and the whole coronavirus thing. This Donald Trump, of course, famously did an executive order forcing people to go back into meat packing houses or whatever they call them, factories, and putting them at risk of COVID. And because of the executive order, their employers can't be held responsible if they get sick and die, and many of them have. And now Congress is trying to do something about this. Tony Corbo, the senior government affairs representative with Food and Water Watch and Food and Water Action, foodandwaterwatch.org is the website, is on the line with us. Tony, welcome back to the program. Tell us about this legislation that Cory Booker is promoting.
Yeah, Senator Booker introduced a bill the other day, S4338, that essentially would stop the line speed waivers that USDA has granted during the pandemic to several, it's 20 meat packers and poultry plants around the country so that they'd be able to increase their line speeds. I mean, this is absolutely incredible. In the middle of a pandemic, and you have workers getting sick and dying, you have inspectors getting sick and dying. This administration decided to grant line speed waivers so that they can increase the line speeds in these meat and poultry plants.
And so what the bill does, and there's a companion bill in the House that was actually introduced 2 weeks ago by Congresswoman Marcia Fudge, which is H.R. 7521. And essentially what these bills do is, number one, they revoke the line speed waivers that USDA has granted during the pandemic. It stops the implementation of the new swine slaughter inspection system that essentially deregulates inspection in the hog slaughter plants and increases the line speeds in those plants. It also requires that the Government Accountability Office do a thorough investigation in terms of the actions that USDA, the Department of Labor, and Health and Human Services, which the Centers for Disease Control is part of, what their actions have been during the pandemic in these meat and poultry plants. So it's a fairly comprehensive bill. It's been endorsed. I mean, this is an incredible coalition that came around to promote this bill. It's backed by labor. It's backed by animal welfare groups and food safety groups.
We're talking with Tony Corbo, the Senior Government Affairs Representative for Food and Water Watch and Food and Water Action. Tony, what are the chances of this getting passed? I mean, it sounds to me like this is the kind of legislation, since it's taking on Trump, head on, that Mitch McConnell will just we're putting a lot of pressure. We're putting a lot of pressure. There's,
negotiations going on in the next, on this next COVID relief bill. And we would like to see this part of the package. There's other legislation that would require OSHA to issue an emergency rule to protect all frontline workers during the pandemic, giving them hazardous duty pay and actually have enforceable standards in these meatpacking plants, so that there's social distancing and requirement that the employees get protective equipment. So we're in the mix here in terms of the discussions on this package.
Do you have any Republicans on board, Tony?
Well, in the House, actually, there is a Republican. There's Jeff Van Drew who
I'm talking about the
switching
Senate.
sides.
If you don't have a half a dozen senators, Republican senators, this thing is going to be toast.
I know. Well, I mean, we're trying to get some Republicans on there.
Is this the sort of thing where if people were to call their senators now at 202-224-3121 and raise some hell, that there might be a chance?
Yeah, I think that would definitely help. That would definitely help, to reach out to some of those Republicans. And so we're building support. We're going to ask our members over the next few days to contact their office, their respective members of Congress and senators, urging them to co-sponsor this legislation.
Great. That number again is 202-224-3121. Tony Corbo with Food and Water Watch. Tony, thanks a lot for dropping by today. Great talking with you.
All right, thanks, Tom. Take care.
Yeah, good luck with this. This is important legislation, and I do appreciate your work on this. Shay in Jacksonville, Florida. Hey, Shay, what's on your mind today?
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. First, I want to say that President Obama did just an impeccable job in honoring the Honorable John Lewis, and just so miss having real leadership at the top.
Yeah. He called for the end of the filibuster, by the way, and he pointed out that it was left over from Jim Crow. I didn't realize that the foundation of the filibuster was Jim Crow, but sure enough. So, we'll see. Excuse me, the interruption, Shay. Go ahead.
No, that's okay. That was a great point that you just made. And, so much of what we're dealing with in our country right now is left over from Jim Crow. You kind of taking me in a different direction, but I will say that we need to revisit the fact that the Confederacy never conceded loss, and they said the South shall rise again. We look at what happened with Reconstruction and Jim Crow and, what happened after the Civil Rights and Voting Rights Act was passed, and, the things that Lee Atwater and others, they pledged to do to keep African Americans from prospering and having equal rights. You can trace a lot of that stuff, but I digress. I wanted to say yesterday your question was why was Trump doing things that he was doing. I just want to recommend a superb piece of journalism. It's called, it's a 3-part series, and it's by Four Corners. It's Secret Spies and Useful Idiots, and they break down, in detail. It is excellent. It's on YouTube, but it talks about Trump and his very nefarious connections to Putin and just all of the other organized crime. But I wanted to say, I live in a red county, and my concern is about children going back to school. And to piggyback on what President Obama asked us to do as far as our civil responsibilities, what I would like to suggest, because I know we all want to do something, but we're not sure what to do, is that as parents, our first responsibility is to protect our children. Donald Trump will not, or Betsy DeVos will not, dictate to me as a parent that I have to send my children or my child into an unsafe and potentially deadly environment. So what I want to suggest is that in honor of Representative Lewis and civil disobedience, is that we have instead of a sit-in, as the way they used to do things in the 60s, that we have a sit-out. And that parents, teachers... I love it. Yeah, and that we refuse. We refuse and then see what he's going to do.
I think that's going to happen, Shay, whether it is an organized effort or not. I my sense of it is that probably more than half the parents in America are just going to say no. I don't want my kid to have the risk, although it's a low risk for my kid. I don't want my kid bringing home a disease to me that is a higher risk, and I certainly don't want the grandparents getting it, which is a super high risk. And
but I think I think the biggest part of it is to have it raised as a pushback to him nationally.
There you go. And I suspect we're going to see that over the course of the next 4 or 5 weeks. Shay, thank you for the call. We'll be right back. It's 45 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Back with more of your calls in the final 15 minutes of our program in just a few minutes. And welcome back. Lori in Portland, Oregon. Hey, Lori, what's up?
Hi, Tom. That was really beautiful by Barack Obama. I just wanted to say that I was at the Portland protest a couple nights ago with my 20-year-old sons, and I talked to a gentleman there. In fact, I asked him to call you and talk to you about this issue. He was going around talking to everybody, trying to bring people's attention to how the federal building is fenced off and the graffiti, and it looks like a movie set. And he was saying the Justice Center next door, which was completely clean, he said, you see that building over there, that one has the same, graffiti every day, and they go out and they power wash it down, and it looks clean every day. But they're saving this as basically a movie drop for Fox News. And I had an experience this morning. I'm debating with my nephew, and sure enough, he sends me this video and says, do you care to explain this? And it looks literally like a war zone. And all the graffiti and the fencing and them in their camo, it had me shaken this morning, because you walk 2 blocks and you just walk casually into a store and buy a bottle of water or whatever. But if you watch those pictures, I even had a friend say that I am staying way away from that area down there. It's not what they're making it look like.
Oh, they're playing these videos on Fox News constantly, absolutely constantly, and Trump is turning them into campaign ads now. This is all made for
completely
television.
are. When I was there, they had native people there drumming. They were giving prayers, actually, even for President Trump. There was a pastor there. He was walking around the circle of the block with probably 100 or 200 people doing a meditation walk. But you don't see any of that. But just having my nephew send me that, and I was down there, and I know what it looks like, and it's really scary to me that it's so crazy looking on the news.
Yeah. The graffiti, by preserving, it hadn't occurred to me that they put the fence up to preserve the graffiti on the building so that they could have a television set that they could make look like a war zone, that they could turn into commercials. I got the turning it into commercials part, but the keeping people from cleaning the building, I didn't realize that they were cleaning the building next door to it every night. I mean,
there was zero graffiti on the next door building. By the end of the evening, we stayed there till midnight. And what I did also notice is the longer, because we talked to a bunch of people, and they usually start tear gassing at about 11. We stayed till 12. We stayed away. We were there peacefully, but they weren't doing it. And the longer they stayed in the building, the smaller the crowd got. But at one point, they did come out and they power washed just the floor of the cement to get rid of the tear gas, I guess, from the day before. But they left all of the graffiti intact. It is literally a movie set.
Yeah, amazing. This is there's a battle for the soul of America right now, and it's being fought on Fox News and on national television, and this is very distressing. Lori, thank you. Thanks for the call. It's good to hear from you, and thanks for that gem of information. We'll be right back with more of your calls in just a moment. It's coming up on 10 minutes before the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program, your media support group for We the People. We're here for you. We'll be right back. The hidden history of the Supreme Court tells the story of Nixon and Reagan's committing treason to steal the White House. We have a new video over at ThomHartmann.com for the people who support our program, and it's an interesting one. The phrase, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, has a really interesting history, and the exploitation of that phrase and that history by right-wingers in 20th century America, or late 20th century America, now 21st century America, also has a fascinating and rather grim history. Just the general absurdity of the idea that somebody can lift themselves off the ground by reaching down and pulling on a strap on their boots. Just think about it for a second. But it's used. This is used as justification by right-wingers, particularly over the last 40 years since the Reagan Revolution, to say, poor people, their poverty is their own fault. Check it out. It's over at ThomHartmann.com. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Hassan in St. Paul, Minnesota. Hey, Hassan, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Thank you for taking my call, and thanks for your show. And thanks for having President Obama carried live. That was wonderful. I want to say like you, I'm really concerned about the 12th Amendment possibility. And I've called about this before, and I've read your article and all of the references in it, and I've taken a pretty deep dive, and I still disagree with your interpretation. And I'll tell you why. The Electoral Count Act was passed in 1887. This is the act that clarified how they do the electoral count. And it did say that the state's laws are the ones that count as far as how they do it. But that, which is now basically Title III, Section 15 of the U.S. Code. That's not what the second part of the 12th Amendment is talking about. In that section, it's talking about if there is no majority, then the state delegations get to do the counting. The Electoral Count Act was actually talking about which slates of electors get counted when there's a problem like in the Tilton Hayes election. So,
where you had competing slates of electors.
Exactly. But that's not what the second part of the 12th Amendment was all about. There's actually only one election that was that went to the House of Representatives under the 12th Amendment, and that's the election of 1824, when there were 4 candidates that got electoral votes. John Quincy Adams ended up winning.
Right, and he did not even, and John Quincy Adams did not even have the majority. Yeah,
no, he didn't even have a plurality. Nobody had a plurality. Andrew Jackson had the plurality, but nobody had a majority.
Right,
and
Jackson
in that
didn't
case,
end up president.
Yeah, and if you look at how that one went, it went to the House, and in fact, the Kentucky legislature had passed a resolution asking its delegation to vote for Jackson, but it was non-binding, and their representatives in Congress, in the U.S. Congress, actually ended up voting for Adams. Where I think you might be misinterpreting it a little bit is in looking at electoral votes versus when nobody has a majority of electoral votes. There's a case called McPherson v. Blacker, where the U.S. Supreme Court said that states have basically unfettered leeway in how to choose their electors. And in fact, that case was recently cited in the Chiafalo case just a couple of weeks ago.
Just a couple of weeks ago, yeah.
Yeah, just where Justice Kagan cited McPherson and said that, the state legislatures...
So bottom line, Hassan, you're saying that you don't... See, I could argue either side of this, but I think at the end of the day, it's going to end up, probably if Trump tries to make this appeal, it's going to end up before John Roberts. Do you think not?
Well, I think it will go to the U.S. Supreme Court at some point, but...
So, and look at what happened when a dispute over the presidency went to the Supreme Court in 2000. They completely ignored the Constitution and handed the presidency to George W. Bush. When Al Gore got 500,000 more votes.
I totally agree. What I'm trying to get through, though, is that to be technically correct about how the 12th Amendment works so that we are ready for it, there are 26 states that have a majority of U.S. House of Representatives as Republicans, even though there's a higher majority of Democratic representatives. So we still have a problem if it happens.
Right. Even if it were just to go to the House. Yeah.
That's right. But the one possible saving grace from that is that the new Congress is seated on January 3rd, and the count happens on January 6th. So if enough can change in Congress so that we end up with at least 26 U.S. representatives from states having a majority of Democratic representatives, then we're in better shape. But of course, the other problem is just having state legislatures certify the non-winning candidate, in which case it doesn't go into the 12th Amendment counting process.
Right. Yeah, I mean, there's a whole bunch of, relatively fine slice and dice lines here. And I just, I'm not trusting Donald Trump. I'm not trusting the Republican Party. Hassan, thank you for the call. And, thanks for a thoughtful conversation about it. We'll be back tomorrow with Anything Goes Friday. Have a great afternoon. Be good to the people around you and yourself. This is such a difficult time for so many people. We all need to cut each other some slack. And in particular, reach out to the people around you and give them a physical or a metaphorical hug. What a challenging time for our country. and get out there and get active. Tag you're it. We'll see you tomorrow. Have a great afternoon.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Raycon Earbuds. Stay at home with better sound. More info at buyraycon.com/Tom. Omega XL, which according to clinical research helps joints. More info at omegaxl.com/Tom. CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. The Clean Phone Pro, phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. Keeps hair loss treatment. More info at keeps.com/Tom. And Plexiderm Wrinkle Reducer. Real science, real results. More info at plexiderm.com, code TOM.